Dear Diary, another full moon has passed, and I write to find myself in good enough spirits. My mission remains the same, to watch a movie that Will Ashton, my fiercest rival, will actually enjoy, unironically. The journey has been nearly impossible. Many lives have been lost. I've begun to lose track of the body count, all in service of a goal I put upon myself too long ago to remember. To find a way, any way, to bring a film to Will Ashton that he will feel strongly about, one way or another.
Oi, you there, film critic boy, out you go.
We should still be hours away, Sergeant.
Blasted film critics. To you everything should feel like 90 minutes, eh? General told us to stop right here. I'm just following orders.
Here, this is just some hipster bar downtown. I didn't take the General for a millennial.
He's right inside if you want to talk to him. Just do well not to bring up those blasted indie movies of yours, eh? He's got enough of his mind just trying to fight this war.
General Public, it's me, the film critic you hired for this suicide mission of yours.
So what? You part of some kind of suicide pod cast?
Maybe one day, General Public. What are we doing here?
Sergeant Tumbler tells me you've been asking around about movie theaters.
General, they told us not to speak of such history once we cross the border.
Why do you think I arranged for us to speak in this noisy dive? Look here, critic. I don't know your reasons for digging up rumors about the past that most people in this god-forsaken wasteland have wisely chosen to put behind them. But by God, if Lord Netflix finds out that someone in my ranks is fishing around for information about movie theaters, it won't just be my head, but the head of every single soldier in my company. You understand?
I do, General Public. But I hope you understand that I can't just turn my back on the one thing that could save my friend and colleague Will Ashton from having to see every movie from this point forward on an 8-year-old laptop screen in his local library. That's not cinema, General. That's hell.
General, we got a problem. A gang of rogue raiders made it over Paramount Plus Mountain and stuck behind our lines. They're looking for him, the critic.
Me? I don't have anything they could possibly want. I'm all out of Bitcoin.
Critic, what in God's name did you review?
Nothing. Nothing at all. I did do a social media reaction for Alita Battle Angel.
Oi, you moron! What did you say?
I said I liked it. But, maybe I didn't like it as much on the second watch.
God help us, Sergeant. Ready the block buttons. I want those cannons set to mute and get Jack Dorsey on the phone. General, he won't do anything. That's an order, Sergeant. Critic, I need your help.
Hey, look, I'm not in this for your revolution, General.
Be that as it may, we're in this mess because of your loose letterbox. I need you to take this and run as far away from this metropolitan area as you can.
General, what in Roger Ebert's name is this?
It's a map, Critic, to the last movie theater.
To be continued. Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, where we discuss the biggest and best films coming to theaters and streaming online. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm John Negroni, chief editor of Cinemaholics, critic for Awards Watch, and I would do anything to spend a weekend in Greece right now. From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and I wonder why he's carrying around a big box of rats. It's Will Ashton.
Hi there.
You can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive on cinemaholics.com, including written reviews and other bonus content. You can write into the show anytime by sending us an email, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. Definitely let us know what's on your mind. And if you'd like to support this show, help us keep the fun going, please head on over to patreon.com/cinemaholics. We also have Cinemaholics merch, where you can purchase all kinds of fun stuff like hoodies, mugs, t-shirts, and shot glasses. Links to everything I just mentioned, including our social media, all that fun stuff, they're all in the show notes. This week on the show, we have a few movies we're going to be getting into. We have mainly indie movies, but also a Netflix musical. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about the Sebastian Stan and Denise Gough romance movie Monday, a vampire scream queen return called Jakob's Wife, and we'll finish the show with a new Netflix hand-drawn animated film, a musical called Arlo the Alligator Boy. So lots coming up. But first, off topics. Will Ashton, are you excited about the Oscars?
Yeah, I think so.
How are you planning? We haven't talked about this yet. How are you planning to check out the ceremony? Are you watching it with your family? What are you going to do?
Yeah. I usually watch with my family. We make a little thing of it. Not like a big to-do, but we have a little bit of snacks and we watch it. I'm the only one that really has an invested care in the Oscars and who wins and whatnot. My parents, I think they have kind of fleeting interest in it, but they, it's something nice to look forward to, and I certainly enjoy it usually. I mean, I guess in recent years, I haven't really enjoyed the ceremony as much because it's kind of haphazard as far as not having a host. And it's just kind of impromptu skits that they try to incorporate with different various celebrities. And those are very hit and miss.
Yeah, hot dog cannons and yeah.
I don't even remember that. The main thing I remember was the James Corden, Rebel Wilson thing where they were making fun of cats 2 months after it came out.
Oh, yeah, that was funny.
And they were making fun of the animators, the one thing everyone agreed to they really tried, they were overworked and all this stuff, and it's just let's just throw them under the bus.
Exactly. No, I was referring to when they went into Wrinkle in Time, interrupted the movie and just started throwing stuff at the audience members. Or
oh,
the time
yeah.
They took a bunch of people from across the theater and walked them through the ceremony for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of wondering if anyone was just can we go back to finishing Wrinkle in Time? I mean, yeah. I guess nobody was really super invested in that movie, to be fair, but I mean, I'm sure somebody would.
It's a good thing it wasn't Avengers Infinity War or something.
Yeah.
People would have been really.
Yeah. No thanks. I'm just going to keep watching.
Yeah. This movie's long enough.
Yeah. Because that was actually when Jimmy Kimmel hosted, right? That was the last year he hosted, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and they've been without a host, and yeah, I like the Oscars. We talk about it pretty much every year here, and one thing we did last year that was a lot of fun, and we're doing it again this year. We're going to be doing a special bonus episode about the Oscars this week, and it's if we picked the winners. So it's the same format as Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel when they would basically just go through most of the categories, if not all of them.
Yeah.
And just stick to hey, if we pick the winners, here's who it'd be. It's not going to be a predictions thing.
Right.
I mean, we might say, I think this is going to win, but I find that stuff, it doesn't age super well.
It does not, because no one, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know if anyone really cares who we think will win, but it won't matter in a week afterwards, because the Oscars are going to come out and whoever wins. It doesn't matter who we think is going to win. So better just to voice our opinions, which are timeless.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's fun to kind of just go through the categories in a more specific way. We already did our favorite movies of the year episode, so that's, a more comprehensive look at the year in film. But this is fun because we get to be a little bit more specific, a little bit more of here's why I think this music should win and all of that. And I find that thing kind of fun.
Do you mean what this movie should win? You said music.
Well, yeah, I was thinking music from the movie should win.
Oh, I see. I got you. You.
I wasn't thinking I was the Grammys all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple music categories, but I'm sure we're going to discuss this. This year's best original song category, oof, it's not strong.
To be totally honest, I have been totally avoiding Oscar stuff. I haven't even looked at the categories or the nominations or anything. I just when the news broke, I didn't look at it. I've heard obviously a lot of the stuff. I know most things that got nominated at this point, but I haven't actually gone through it. And I don't know why. I'm not as interested this year for some reason. I just don't really care as much. I mean, I'm going to once we do if we pick the winners thing, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's because it's a pandemic and I'm just, it feels kind of weird to be caring about this kind of thing at the moment when so much stuff is going on. It's not to make anybody feel bad if they are into it or anything. It's just, I'm not in the mood, I guess.
I mean, I don't think this year's categories are as strong as some other years. It's because there's a limited number of films they could choose from. But there are some categories I have some investment in, or some emotional investment, I guess, or some care in terms of what wins or what could win. This year, I don't think I'll be able to catch everything before we do our bonus episode, but I've never actually watched every single movie that's been nominated for an Oscar in a given year, and I'm gonna try to do that this year because I want it to be like kind of like you're saying, like there aren't as many stakes this year, so I kind of want to make it a little bit more interesting for me to actually have an opinion on every category. And so far, I'm pretty close. Like I still have a few short films to catch, and I have like maybe like 4 or 5 feature films that I'm trying to do. But for the most part, I've caught all like the major movies and stuff.
I think the big one for you still is the Father, right?
Right,
Like
which
the
is
one.
yeah, which is currently $20 to rent, which I think is a little silly. I mean, you know, we've covered some films that were $20 to rent, and that's fine. Like we're doing a review, but I'm hoping the price goes down at some point. But I don't know what the plan is there.
That's tough. Yeah, I mean that movie, like we weren't able to get a screener. You know, we weren't able to catch it at the theater. It's pretty ridiculous, but hopefully you'll be able to catch that because I mean it's a pretty major movie.
Yeah, I mean it's nominated for Best Picture, and I guess Anthony Hopkins is has a decent chance of winning Best Actor. I have to assume that Chadwick Boseman's going to win, but who knows?
That's the conventional wisdom, but hey, like we said, in a week it's all going to be moot, right? So
Yeah.
that's going to be coming later in this week. Also planning to do another bonus episode this week for a show I've been watching called Shadow and Bone on Netflix. It comes out on the 23rd, I think. And I'll say real quick, love the show. I'm not allowed to really review it or anything quite yet, but currently planning to do a bonus episode with Alicia Grauso about that show. She's a big fan of the show and the books. So we're going to be talking about the first season. Definitely looking forward to that convo. It's definitely, I've been craving like some fun, you know, TV fantasy that is like, not like Game of Thrones necessarily, but something that's like more that's big and ambitious. You know, I feel like I haven't really gotten something that satisfying in that genre since maybe The Witcher. And even then, like The Witcher has a lot of issues as a show, even though I'm a fan. So Shadow and Bone, though, I can't wait to talk more about that later in the week. Now, real quick, we do have one other movie we wanted to mention before we do the full-length reviews. And this is a movie that came out at Sundance this year. It's called In the Earth. It's the latest Ben Wheatley film. And we were actually considering doing a review for it, but the problem is we saw it in January, and neither of us like liked it that much.
I enjoyed it. I mean,
I say liked it that much,
Sure.
you know, like I my thing with it is I don't remember it well enough. I'd have to rewatch it, and I don't have an interest in rewatching it.
Right.
And it's also kind of hard to rewatch at the moment, isn't it? Because it's being released by Neon on I think this week. They were originally going to release it April 30th, and they did a little early, I think, because like a lot of things in April got switched around between Mortal Kombat and
some musical chairs with these release dates for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I don't remember it super well, and you know, now that it's kind of like coming out, I think it's like limited theaters, maybe virtual cinema. I'm actually not sure.
I believe it's only theaters for now. There might be digital screeners for select critics, but I don't exactly know what the theatrical rollout is outside, or what the rollout is outside of theaters. I mean,
it's tricky because it's UK and United States around the same time, and because it's a co-production between the two countries. So, but like I said, it's Neon, and I know that a friend of mine really loved this film. I didn't like it much. We want to do a mini review, just kind of like vaguely reflect on it. Starting with you. I mean, we don't have to go through the synopsis super deeply, but how would you describe it?
Well, this is the movie that Ben Wheatley made, I guess kind of as in-between film. Like, he has a few kind of blockbuster projects in the works. I think he's, like, attached to, like, Tomb Raider 2 and, like, The Meg 2 and, like, a few other things. But when the pandemic happened, he felt inspired to write this sort of a post-apocalyptic, like, sort of like a mix between, like, Annihilation and, like, something kind of, like, folklore-ish horror kind of thing.
Yeah, it's combining like science and like folklore, supernatural. You know, like there's a few movies like this. There's I think a John Carpenter movie that kind of gets in this territory. But yeah, it's sort of like a man versus nature story, but also like a man versus a supernatural. And I don't know. I personally enjoyed it. I think it takes a little bit to get going. It's a lot of setup. And I'm not quite sure if that was because of the limitations of making a movie during the pandemic and because it relies primarily on 2 actors and 2 characters. So I think the performances are pretty good by and large, but I don't think the characters themselves that were introduced to for like the first 45 minutes to an hour are that investing or that unique to really drive the narrative that much at that point. I do think by the second half, that's where like the Wheatley aspects kind of come in. If we're comparing this to something like
his Rebecca remake they did with Netflix a few months
Oh,
ago.
yeah,
I
that's
certainly
right.
think this is more in the vein of what you would expect from the filmmaker, but I feel like by that point it's also a little bit like too little too late. Like I think it's well enough to make it feel like it's worth the investment, but I also don't feel like it makes it on the same level as some of his better works. But I would say is like a like B minus effort for him. It's a solid film.
I'm not a fan personally. So you kind of mentioned he wrote this film and then made it during the pandemic. It does feel like a response to quarantine and lockdown. And the thing I do like about this movie is kind of the thing I was mentioning before, where it's taking the scientific thing and like merging it with these other supernatural elements. The John Carpenter movie I was thinking of was Prince of Darkness, the 1987 film, which I think is the second in the Apocalypse trilogy that he did. So before In the Mouth of Madness, after The Thing. And I like that film a lot because I think that film, well, I should say this, it's not a great film, Prince of Darkness.
Is that the one that he did with Mark Hamill?
No, not Mark Hamill. Donald Pleasance.
Okay, I'm thinking of a different movie then. I'm not as familiar with John Carpenter's '90s work. I'll admit. After
This is
like
late '80s.
was it late '80s? Okay, I know like the last like I saw Escape from L.A. and then I saw years later The Ward, but the stuff in between there I'm not as familiar with from John Carpenter.
Yeah, In the Mouth of Madness is '90s, but of course that film is Sam Neill. But
Right.
what I do like about that movie, it's not great as a movie because I think that the main issue with Prince of Darkness for me is all the exposition, and that's actually something that In the Earth does a little bit better. Like there's exposition, but I always felt like the characters were advancing, like things were constantly happening, mainly to Joel Fry's foot. And that is another thing I do like. The body horror in this is cool. I think Ben Wheatley is just really good at like merging genres in general.
Yeah.
He's just like able to take like a Saw movie and then kind of like merge it with this like kind of off kilter Last House on the Left kind of thing. I really like. There's like some characters that come up in here. The thing I don't like about this movie is the characters. I just didn't care about any of them. I found them unpleasant. I found unpleasant and not in a fun way. I think the two main leads particularly like Laura Torchia is kind of interesting. She's like a park ranger character, and I remember liking her fine, but I found Joel Fry's character to be pretty insufferable. I found the doctor character played by Haley Squires to just be really placid and uninteresting. The only character that I think is like you could really tell that Ben Wheatley had a heart for and really tried to come alive was Reece Shearsmith's character.
Oh, for sure.
This like the loner dude. He was so interesting, and I just kept wishing that he was more of the movie, but he kind of disappears for a big chunk of it, and then.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like we didn't get anything really satisfying with him. So I think though there's so many elements in this movie that I really like, but as a movie, I was really, I don't want to say bored with it, because I wasn't that bored. I was pretty uninterested in what it was trying to say. So I kind of walked from the bad taste in my mouth. I walked away from it. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I respected the individual moments enough to feel like it was worth the time and investment that I put into it. But at the same time, yeah, like I was saying, I don't think it really meets his other films, or at least his better films from his earlier work. But I do think like there's stuff in here outside of what you mentioned that I do like. Like I really enjoy the Clint Mansell score that they have.
It's fantastic. Best thing about it, probably.
Yeah, and I do agree with you that like the practical effects that they use in this, especially for some of the like gorier elements of the movie, are really good. He's really good at like blending these like very unsettling images, but in a way that's like very darkly comedic. And I think when he does get time to do stuff like that, he shines. But like you said, it does feel like there are moments in this where he really cared and came to life, and he felt very like animated as a filmmaker. And other times where he's just like, okay, let's just get this so we can get to this point. And I think it's fine if you like kind of brush through those as quickly as you can. But it just felt like the first half of this was a lot of like that type stuff. Like, okay, let's get this going. Let's get this so we can kind of get to the stuff later on that I want to do. And like I said, I think that stuff is good enough to where I'm able to respect the film and appreciate it. But I just kind of wish that was maybe the script was either a little bit tightened up, or maybe that we had kind of more of the like goofy, freaky stuff that was in the second half in the first half, like kind of like building it up a little bit more. I don't exactly know which would have made it better. But in either case, yeah, I thought it was fine, but nothing truly remarkable or anything.
If I'm hearing you right, I mean, I'm kind of the opposite maybe, because I don't like the second half of this movie. I like the first half, like leading up to and through the loner stuff. I think that...
Yeah, I guess we disagree there.
Yeah, what I
Hey,
like
we
about the
disagree.
first half is that finally. I just find it like I like that it's more contemplative. I like that it takes its time a little bit more. It's not as on the nose. It's hinting at supernatural stuff, but it's not like hitting you with all this just out of left field, like this is what this movie actually is kind of fodder. So
Sure.
yeah, it's a slower burn in the first half for sure, and it's definitely
Yeah.
not for everybody. But I think it struck more of a chord with me. So I'm like a really high C plus. I respect this movie a lot, and I did look at it as like maybe it's like a B minus. But I think because I don't like the ending, I don't like where this movie ultimately goes, and I really don't like these characters. I think that's I kind of go with the highest C plus personally.
I'm I guess admirable B minus on this. I respect the slow burn at the beginning, and I do think that's true to his style. I don't want to make it seem otherwise, but I kind of agree with you that I think maybe it was just the characters themselves that weren't investing enough to warrant that slow burn or that kind of like building dread. If maybe they were fleshed out, or maybe I had more investment in those two protagonist characters, I might have been a little bit more sympathetic towards the first half of this. But I think by and large, like I said, I think it generally works well, and I certainly think for like a pandemic movie or a movie that was made during COVID, I think it stands out a little bit more, primarily because like we were saying in another review that we were doing, that I think movies like this that are obviously about COVID but not like addressing COVID tend to work better, because like I think the movies that are explicitly about COVID just tend to be a drag.
I mean, and they'll age better, you know. It's kind of like how Godzilla. It's not about directly nuclear stuff, but I mean, obviously, it's reflective of the time, which is a big difference and a good difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that respect, like I found this to be more admirable than something like Lockdown or Songbird or whatever. But I think by and large, like I said, it's kind of like B level Ben Wheatley, and I don't disrespect or anything. I think it's enjoyable for what it is, but I would say go in with fairly modest expectations.
Agreed. Yeah, if you're listening and you find it vaguely intriguing, yeah, maybe check out a trailer, maybe just sort of like look at the or look at some of the movies we kind of dropped there. And if you like those, if you like John Carpenter films, and if you like Ben Wheatley, this probably is a no-brainer. I do like Ben Wheatley. I you know, barring Rebecca, I think Free Fire was a really fun time. So, all right. That is our mini review of In the Earth. I'm actually surprised how much we were able to discuss there. It was kind of coming back to me a little bit, but yeah.
Sure.
There you go. But let's start with our first full-length review of the week. Very excited to talk about this movie. This is another one you saw a while back. I hope you were able to remember a lot of it. I just watched it for the first time.
I think it's a pretty memorable film, I'd say.
Sure. Let's talk about Monday.
Hi, I'm Mickey.
Chloe. It was really nice to meet you. And thank you for not being an asshole.
Try not to be an asshole.
Yes.
You don't have your keys, right? You want to go to an island?
I go back to the States tomorrow.
You're gonna miss this, right?
You're in love with this guy.
Let's be roomies.
Let's be roomies.
What's coming?
Everything.
Everything? Chloe Gaines, you are the sexiest woman I know. You guys want to be Chloe's family?
Monday is a film directed by Argyris Papadimitriopoulos. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I was hoping you would know it. I was not even going to take a swing.
Sure. He made another movie from a few years ago called Suntan. Did you ever see Suntan?
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay. I haven't seen it myself, but his latest movie came out at the Toronto International Film Festival last year. That's when you saw it. And it is with IFC Films, and it just got its release here in the States as of, I think just a couple of days ago as we record this. But this is a film that takes place in Greece. It is kind of like a getaway romance film that turns into a different kind of film over the course of its runtime. It's kind of a long movie, too. It's almost 2 hours. And it centers around two people. One of them is played by Sebastian Stan, who is this freewheeling DJ who's lived in Greece. He's American, but he's lived in Greece for about 7 years now. And he falls into this sort of whirlwind romance with a woman named Chloe, played by Denise Gough. And we kind of see how their, relationship sort of starts as like a meet cute chance encounter and ultimately evolves into something pretty intense and pretty, I guess you said a word there, memorable as the movie goes forward. I don't want to reveal too much about this movie. I did go into it not knowing anything about it. I didn't watch any trailers. I didn't even know the genre. I just started watching the movie. And it's kind of funny when you watch this movie not knowing the genre. I was feeling kind of tense in the first act because I was like, ooh, what's going to happen? Like I didn't know if it was like a thriller, if it was going to be that kind of thing. Ultimately, I was like, okay, this movie is like basically a condensed version of the Before trilogy. That's what I kept thinking of throughout this thing.
Yeah, if you put the Before trilogy in like a blender and like mixed it up and like put some tequila in it, that's basically what you got.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes. Way more sex in this movie than the Before trilogy. I'll also say that. But yeah, I will say, Will, you kind of prepared me for this film a little bit. You said that you liked it, but it was getting a tepid response. Like not a lot of critics were really liking it that much. Some were, some weren't.
Right.
You were curious what I was going to say or what I was going to think. I'll just get it out of the way. I really dug this.
I'm glad to hear that.
This is a good movie. I kind of have been looking into some of the negative reviews and seeing people's points, and they're interesting. I see a lot of valid complaints about this movie, and I think it ultimately comes down to what you're looking for in a movie is going to determine your takeaway from this movie, and also your stance, either your cynicism or optimism when it comes to relationships might really paint where you land on this movie, in my opinion. But yeah, Will, definitely go for it. Why do you like this one?
Well, I also think that, I haven't seen too many negative reviews, or at least I haven't read too many negative reviews, but from what I remember from the festival, it did seem like your patience or your tolerance for the main characters is a big factor here. If like you just find these characters to be completely insufferable and like annoying, which is understandable because the movie itself is pretty cynical about love and romance and stuff like that. And it's not afraid to make these characters fairly, privileged, pompous people who don't have a lot of self-reflection, I guess. So I can understand like if you don't find that to be a investing time at the movies, I can certainly respect that and understand that. However, I found it to be, at least at the time, like it just a good fresh jolt of romantic comedy, or I guess an anti-rom-com, because I did find these characters to be pretty entertaining and inspired. Like I said, I can understand that some people were taken aback by, just how like laissez-faire, I guess they are, in terms of just like having sex wherever they want, or like kind of just throwing parties whenever they wish and not really respecting privacy or rules or laws or pretty much any good sense or common decency in terms of their Greece locations. But I did think the performances here felt very thoughtful and rich, and I think this might honestly be my favorite Sebastian Stan performance. I don't know if it's his best, because I think, I don't know, I imagine like I, Tonya is probably like his best performance, just in terms of like crafting a character and like kind of like allowing me to forget that I'm watching Sebastian Stan. But this is the first movie I can think of where I'm like, okay, this is the charismatic guy that Hollywood is seeing. Because I just feel like with stuff like The Winter Soldier, or like his role as the Winter Soldier and like all these other things, he's kind of put it into like these supporting character roles where sometimes he shines, sometimes he's kind of forgettable. But in this movie, he gets a star vehicle that I think really stands up to him. Granted, I haven't watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier, so I don't know if that show is doing well for him or not, but I do think this movie tends to work for him, and I do think he has pretty instantaneous chemistry with Denise Gough. Is that her name?
It's either Go or Gough. I've been saying Gough, but I think it hopefully either. I don't know. Yeah,
and I just really appreciate that these actors, they seem to be, very aware what they're doing and like fully committed to the bit. Like they have very like liberated performances. Like they, not only just in terms of like embodying themselves like with nudity and like sex, and just like willing to allow these characters to be pretty repugnant people, but also just, you know, allowing themselves to be fairly vulnerable and open up in these kind of bombastic and stylistic ways. And like I said, I mean, I can understand that that might turn some people off, that might not win everybody over, but by the end of this, I felt like the roller coaster was worth it.
Yeah, they're self-destructive. That's the thing. And I think some people will
Absolutely.
find the way that they're self-destructive, that's what they'll find repugnant,
Yeah.
right? With Mickey, his self-destruction is like throughout the course of the movie, he just finds himself, like he feels guilt whenever he's happy. And I think that speaks to why I think you like this performance a lot more than the other ones. And I think it's because he's just more vulnerable in this movie. You know, like he's kind of vulnerable in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but it's like comparing Coca-Cola to ribeye. You know, in this movie, it's way more raw. It's not as manufactured. It's not supposed to be also sweet. You know, it's
You take that Coke and you put a little bit of I guess whatever, like I don't want to use tequila again because I use that metaphor
Yeah, you already
but,
went there. Well, I was gonna say I would put some Jack in that Coke.
Yeah, I was gonna say some Jack in that Coke. Maybe slide him a line and just like, this is what happens.
Right. But no, I mean, I think in this performance, I think there is a very material difference, and it's weird because like the tone of it's not that heavy. Like a lot of this movie is he's just letting loose. He is just like experiencing life at the fullest, and it works for me because I can see what attracts Chloe to this guy in spite of her better judgment.
Yeah.
And you can easily make a case for either of these characters being the lead of this movie. Like it's such a great separation or it's such a great two-hander in that sense. Like you need both of them, but there's not one who really outshines the other in terms of like whose story this is. I think
Absolutely.
with her main thing in this is addiction. Like she is addicted to a lot of things. She seems to be addicted to this guy, you know, right? There's some stuff over the course of the film that she might be addicted to. She might be an alcoholic. She might be addicted to sex, and she is with somebody who is wrong for her in that regard because he is very permissive and he just kind of like enables a lot of these behaviors that she has been trying to like bottle up.
Yeah.
And that takes it to the thing I like most about this movie is that it's exploring an age group that feels very new to me in terms of like people experiencing the ecstasy of their youth, but we're watching people do it in their 40s and
Or late 30s, I think.
I think the movie kind of like sets them up as like very early 40s. I think there's even a line in the movie at one point where they mention like one of their friends is like 41 or something. Okay. And they certainly don't look very young, but I think that's part of the movie is that like, you know, like Denise
They don't
Gough,
look old.
They don't look old, but
yeah.
they also don't, you know, they clearly are too old for what they're doing in this movie, right?
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
And there's this whole like that's another addiction I think they both have is to like, you know, maintaining their youth or holding on to their youth, and she's able to do that by being with this guy. And there's this whole subplot with a kid who's in the mix too, and how both of them kind of need to grow up. And I think there's a lot of interesting messaging here in that regard. And I told you, Will, like right after I saw the movie, that I think this is a great predictor of what it's going to be like when millennials. You know, right now, a lot of millennials are in their like mid to late 30s. And I think a lot of us are going to be going through this when we hit our 40s of like, I don't
40.
want to grow like this Neverland mentality.
Yeah.
This is 40. Well, that was the Gen X thing, right? But now we're kind of getting to the point where millennials are starting to enter that decade of life. And I like the idea of more movies addressing that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do think I can understand if people like don't really buy into the characters, I guess. But for me, I didn't feel like they were like unrealistic to the point of like I couldn't buy into them or couldn't believe that they would exist. And like even though this is a heightened world and like everything is from their prism, so it's like everything's sort of like overly romanticized, like over heightened, and like even like kind of having this like European background kind of adds that flair to it as well. But I also just feel like I could see characters like this. Like I don't know if I'd want to spend time with them, but I could reasonably like imagine like seeing somebody like these two people at the bar, just kind of like over the hill, but like still trying to like, you know, rock out karaoke and like, you know, throwing back one too many drinks and just stuff like that. And I just think, like I said, I think the fact that the actors like are really willing to allow themselves to, you know, be in these characters and play these personalities and all their raw insecurities and also their like kind of charming seductions and stuff like that is just a testament to these two actors and also the director for, you know, clearly having a lot of passion and flair as a filmmaker in a way that doesn't feel overly showy, but does definitely give it a good sense of pizzazz, I guess.
Yeah. He gets to have some fun meta commentary there because he names one of the characters after himself. And this is, of course, the character who brings, Mickey and Chloe together. So there's like a little bit of a fun nod there. Clearly, he's trying to create, yeah. But I think what people seem to not be liking about this movie, it seems like people like the first part of the movie, which really does feel like a short film in a lot of ways. It has a very clear beginning, middle, and end. And what I like about that structure is that type of short film is usually what an entire romantic comedy is, or a romantic drama. And you kind of called this, I think rightfully, the anti-rom-com in that regard, because it actually goes further. It goes past the big grand gesture and actually is like, all right, well, let's see what happens next. Yeah, let's happen, after the post meet cute. The rest of the movie is like a morning after kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I dig about it. And I think, that's why we mentioned the Before trilogy. The Before trilogy is absolutely about that sort of thing of like exploring a relationship after the, Hollywood romance of the first movie. And then like the follow up in the like later decades and how all of that comes together. This movie does a similar thing, but it's also using a kind of a fun plot device kind of thing that I remember from Master of None, the Aziz Ansari show on Netflix, which it had a whole episode where the main character, he's been in this relationship with this character for a while, and this episode charts their relationship, but it only shows what's going on in the relationship in the mornings. So it's a fun thing because you're just seeing what's going on in the mornings. You never see what they're doing in the afternoon or the night or anything. Okay. And this movie's kind of doing the same thing with weekends. We never quite get to Monday. Like the movie starts, or like these different sequences start on a Friday. We see what happens on Saturday and then Sunday, but then we don't actually see a Monday until toward the end of the film. And I think it's, I don't know, I just think it's kind of a fun thing. It's a clear idea, and we don't get a ton of movies that I think are this frank and honest about relationships to this extent. Like we don't get them that often, like this kind of Before trilogy mechanic. They tend to have a lot of like extra stuff thrown into them. Like genre films. It's just kind of nice to see a more chill, laid back version of this sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah, we're getting to the point now where like we are so aware of like genre conventions and stuff like that. And to the point where we're kind of getting to this like meta point, but now we're at kind of a post meta point where it's like we're kind of returning to like an earnest mentality of them, but also being critical of like the conventions of them. And I would say of the ones we've gotten at this point, this is one of the better ones at acknowledging like what people like about rom-coms, like kind of playing into that and allowing you to get invested in in that kind of rom-com formula, but also acknowledging that like, okay, like we have to realize that like these characters are terrible for each other. There's no real happy ending here for these type of people being together. Like the circumstances of it are just not going to produce a happy ending, and here's why. Yeah. And I it's not like the most original idea or anything, but I think stylistically it works here really well.
Yeah, and this feels like a 70s movie to me. It has that same sort of like when the 70s happened, like this. It felt like directors were unchained. They were able to be like, all right, let's really explore human sexuality on a deeper level compared to what we were used to, able to do. And I think we're kind of hopefully getting some more of that with these kinds of movies. I mean, it seems like nowadays you can make a movie about anything. You can show and do anything. But this movie, I think, does that with emotion, and it does that using sex as a plot device in a way that does feel kind of fresh. So I don't want to make it sound like this is the best movie in the world or anything. It is still really long. There are some scenes in this movie that are very, very cringe, and there are some that I feel kind of overwritten. And I do think there are aspects of it that certainly fall short and make it hard to love this movie more than like I like it a lot. I don't love it, I guess, if that makes sense.
That's fair.
So and the side characters I think are very take him or leave him. I think that
for sure.
They're really, there's no one who really makes an impact. I think that this movie just keenly focuses on Mickey and Chloe for the better and for the worse. So, but I still enjoy this movie quite a bit. So I'm a very strong, happy B on Monday.
I think I'm a little bit higher on it, but not too higher. I think I'll give it a low B plus, just because, like I said, I think what I find charming about it really did take me. And like, even though I saw it, like I said, at TIFF when I was watching a lot of good films, I just remember this one made a little bit more of an impact because it had that flair and that style, but also, just felt like a pretty well-rounded movie in terms of like you were saying earlier, like having two characters that feel fairly fleshed out. This is a two-hander where it doesn't feel like either character is focused on like too little or too much. I think they're able to find that balance pretty well. And, it's just a fun, rollicking good time, but also has enough of emotional impact to stick with me. So, I think it's a solid time. I don't know how wide of an audience it's going to get. I don't know, like, if people only know Sebastian Stan from the Marvel movies, I don't exactly know if they're going to enjoy this, but I think it's worth the investment. And when you say cringe, do you mean like intentionally cringy or like stuff that like you were saying before?
The party scene, which is intentionally cringy,
right,
for sure. I'm not arguing otherwise, but I do think that it goes a little bit too far. It's trying to get a reaction out of me, and that bugged me a bit. Well, I think it just tried too hard and when it didn't need to.
But see, I guess I'm at a point now where it's like, if you're going to try hard, I'm not going to dock you as much, I guess, because like I'd rather see someone like try to do something like that and push the boundaries maybe a little bit more than they should, because at least they're like trying something and it's a little bit more memorable than if like they played it safe in some regard. And like everything else about this movie is not playing it safe. So like I don't think it would make sense to not push it to the extreme. Like I said, it just kind of feels like a tidal wave kind of film where it's like everything is to like the 10 or to 11 or whatever, and just like I actually appreciate the movie for going that far and stuff like that. And I don't think it does anything like too graphic or too extreme that might like might turn people off in that respect. But I do appreciate the movie is willing to make these characters pretty despicable in certain ways.
Before we move on, I do want to mention, because we didn't talk about Denise Gough enough, probably. I think that I didn't love her American accent. It kind of made me wish they had just let her be Irish or British. Because we know she could do a great British accent. We saw her in Kid Who Would Be King, and she's the voice of Yennefer in the Witcher video game, The Wild Hunt.
And we both made the same comparison without knowing it, that we think that she would be perfect for a Princess Diana biopic if that ever comes to be. I know she's a little bit older than Diana when she passed, but
she could make it happen.
I think she could pull it off. I think if Hollywood doesn't do it in the next couple of years, they're being foolish.
I have to agree with you there. But she's fantastic in this movie though, and I think that she's just the chemistry between these two characters. I've seen some people say they don't have chemistry. And
what movie are they watching?
I know, I don't get it, but I think it just comes down to different people, different experiences. I think a lot of people are watching this movie and being like, why would she want to be with this guy? But then I look at Sebastian Stan and I'm like, well, I mean, wouldn't you? I mean, let's be honest.
That's the thing too. So like, I don't know, like, I mean, I'm a straight male, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but like before I never really got it with Sebastian Stan, and after this movie, like, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I think you messaged me as like, he's a hunk. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, he's a hunk in this
gets
movie.
that. Yeah, he's you want to F with this boy, clearly. But okay, that's Monday, a film that we both definitely enjoyed, and sounds like we both recommend. If you're looking for an indie movie this weekend, something that's a little bit off the beaten path, I think a lot of you will enjoy this one too. I hope people check it out despite the Rotten Tomatoes score. It's pretty low right now. It's like in the middle.
Really?
It's like 52% or something.
Oh really? Well, that, like I said, I guess that makes sense, because like I said, I mean, it got kind of a mixed response out of TIFF, and I was like, am I like on an island here? Am I just seeing like something else in this movie that other people weren't seeing? So I'm glad you at least liked it.
I did find you're not alone. It's not just me. It's not just you. I saw a bunch of other critics being like, y'all don't know what you're talking about. This movie is fantastic. So, it's just one of those things. I think, it's hitting people differently.
Yeah. I think people will appreciate this one more with time, or like with reflection, just kind of like looking at it.
Maybe.
Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would hope so, but who knows?
Who knows indeed. But yeah, you can check it out right now for yourself. I think it's in virtual cinemas and select theaters, I want to say. And I did my part with the Rotten Tomatoes. I reviewed this for Awards Watch, and I gave it the old fresh. So
bumped it up to 53.
Yeah, I did what I could.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our next film, Jacob's Wife. So this is a very, very different movie, but it's also got a lot of romance.
Yeah, another toxic relationship, but I guess different way.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is a campy horror thriller directed by Travis Stevens, who I don't know if Travis Stevens' work. This might be his debut, in fact.
No.
I've never heard of him.
He did Girl on the Third Floor before this, I believe. I saw that one I think I saw that last year or the year before for my annual Halloween marathon. It was like another kind of South by Southwest indie title that got a lot of praise. But before those two films, he was a producer. Like, he's been producing a lot of horror movies and other like different genre movies.
Yeah, and he produced this movie.
Yeah, as well as this one. He's been producing stuff for, I want to say, like 15 or 20 years. And so he definitely has some experience, but he's been recently pushing himself as a filmmaker, with this being his sophomore film.
Right on. He also does the screenplay with Kathy Charles and Mark Steensland, and Barbara Crampton, classic horror icon from the 80s.
Yeah,
is not just starring in this movie, but also as a producer, along with her co-stars Larry Fessenden and Bonnie Aarons. So this premiered pretty recently at South by Southwest. That's when you saw it. I was supposed to see it at South by. I had it saved in my queue, but I ended up having to prioritize something else. But I did get a chance to see it this past week. So this is another one that we're kind of talking about that I just saw, that you saw a little bit ago. And right now, I think you can watch it on demand and digitally as of a few days ago via Shudder, and it's being distributed by RLJE Films. And this is definitely a shorter film compared to the last one we talked about. This is only 98 minutes, so kind of a quick watch. And, you can kind of see why. It's a vampire movie, and it is definitely hearkening back to the Barbara Crampton films of the 1980s. We kind of we touched on it, but yeah, absolutely a legend. And she's been kind of having a bit of a comeback in recent years too, right? Like, people will remember her from like Reanimator and Chopping Mall and stuff. Sure. But she came back not too long, You're Next. Yep. I guess that was a decade ago now. And she was in Dead Night and Little Sister, and she's been kind of like creeping back up. Yeah, creeping into some more film roles. And I think this is a really great stepping stone for her comeback, in my opinion. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I have no fault with her performance. I definitely think her performance is the highlight of the film, and as a showcase for her, it definitely suits her well. As for the film itself, I have, I guess, more mixed feelings. But
that's a shame. I like this one quite a bit, but let's set this up. I mentioned Larry Fessenden, another iconic guy. I mean, not just an actor, but he's been a producer, a writer. He's directed films. He's even been a cinematographer and an editor. You have seen this guy in plenty of things. I think he was one of his big ones was Wendigo, for example, and he also did The Last Winter. But so he is. I don't remember his most recent film, actually. I think he did one a few years ago. But one thing I remember him from more recently than not was the horror video game Until Dawn, which oh my gosh, he was one of the writers for that, and absolutely killed it. That's a fun video game. I know you don't really play the video games yourself, Will Ashton, but if you were ever to play one, that would be one I would recommend to you. But anyway, so this, as I mentioned, is a vampire movie. It centers around this married couple. Larry Fessenden plays a pastor who is married to a very submissive kind of pastor's church mouse wife named Anne, who's played by Barbara Crampton. And there is kind of early on in this movie, you kind of get that, it's doing the vampire thing, but from the angle of a horror movie about adultery. And that was the first moment I was like, yes, a horror movie that is not about grief. They're actually tackling something different. Some recent horror films have definitely gotten into, this horror film like Relic. It's about Alzheimer's and dementia. And, but then, Hereditary is about grief, and Midsummer is about a breakup, right? Well, this movie is about adultery, and how when you've been in a relationship for a while and the opportunity presents itself to sort of like, allow yourself to feel more alive or to revisit something from your past, the sort of dangers, but then also the exhilaration you can get from that. And it likens it metaphorically to being a vampire, this like hunger for blood, this feeling like the person you want to be is rejected by your partner and maybe even by society at large. And I got a real kick out of this movie. It's gory. It's pretty, it's not hardcore or anything, but it has some really fun twists, particularly with Fessenden's character. I was nervous about this movie early on because I'm loving Barbara Crampton in this. She is coming alive on the screen, but man, Fessenden is just like this boring vanilla pastor guy. I wasn't into it, but then something happens toward the early part, kind of early to the middle part of this movie with his character that is so fun, that is so off the wall. And I dug this movie quite a bit. But yeah, why do you have some mixed feelings on it?
It's not like I'm like super negative on the film or anything like that. Like I said, I think what you admired about the film isn't too far off from my own positives of the film. And I guess for me, though, where I kind of diverge is that I think similar to how I felt about his directorial debut, I think Travis Stevens is very good about like directing certain individual scenes well. Like there's like a scene here where like she's at the dentist and things don't quite go as she expected, and I think he's good about like kind of like drawing out the tension and kind of like building up scenes like that. And then likewise, like you're saying, like kind of the more like outlandish kind of like gore heavy stuff, I think he is pretty self-aware and like making like those scenes just like as like absurdly B-movie goofy as possible. But I don't think he's quite good at like laying the groundwork for those scenes. And I imagine you're going to disagree with this film, but I feel... But I think like towards the beginning of the film, when we have to kind of establish the drab, kind of like, you know, like mundane aspects of the film, I think he kind of he's not really good about pacing those scenes out to the point where it's like, I think he can like, I just feel like the way he visually communicates those scenes, it leaves something to be desired. Like it just feels like he's kind of drawing the movie out to make it a certain length. It just feels like those scenes kind of play out too long, and it just feels like they don't have a lot of energy compared to those scenes. And I get like that's kind of the point, but at the same time, it just feels like this movie really takes a while to get going. And even like the scenes where it's like kind of like establishing the warehouse and building up to that point feels like it takes a long time, longer than it should. And it just feels like maybe if they were a little bit more judicious with like the edits or like kind of building up, because that's an issue I also had with Girl on the Third Floor, is that like things just kind of felt like they weren't quite paced right, or like they're playing out too long, or like he wasn't really giving it quite the flavor he needs to, because he just kind of wants to get to like the stuff towards the second and third act where it's a little bit more poppy and weird and absurd. And like I said, I think those moments in this movie work fine. I just feel like he just never quite finds that tonal balance in a way that makes the themes really stand out. And I feel like even the commentary itself is fairly surface level at times. Like I think there could have been a little bit more drawn out there with like the religious themes and like the idea of like, you know, like this is literally kind of playing tongue in cheek on the idea of like till death do you part. And I think that's kind of a fun concept. I just don't think he really gets a full lot of like, there's not a lot there that I think that's established or dive into beyond the surface. And I don't think it needs to like be super deep or super in depth, but I just feel like there's a better film that constantly kind of comes out here that isn't fully realized.
You know, you kind of said the word goofy. I would say I wouldn't use the word goofy. I would say that it's more comedic. And it's kind of like there are some scenes that are just played to be a little bit more humorous than you would expect. But I think the reason this movie works for me a lot more is because these two characters are so, like, when the movie begins, they're so repressed. And I think the reason the pacing worked for me is because it is such a gradual and satisfying build up to them just sort of being unleashed upon this movie. This is definitely one of those movies where I think the characters are way, way, way more well written than the story. And that can be difficult because I can understand where you're coming from with like the groundwork for the movie and how certain scenes kind of don't always go in directions that are all that interesting in some ways. But I think it totally works because I think Crampton and Fessenden are just so good at this. I think they take these kind of ho-hum characters and their performances like add an extra dimension to them, in my opinion. I think too, like what Stevens gets right here is he totally gets how to get across visually what these characters are feeling without having to really say anything all that much.
I guess I disagree with you there.
Oh my gosh. I think the editing and the way that we see like how dissatisfied with her life Anne is, like through like a quick edited montage of like them brushing their teeth to, you know, them sleeping to like just this like early on thing. I think he absolutely nailed it. I got it. Like there was nothing else that needed to be said. So then when other things develop in the movie, I was fully on board. And I just liked that it didn't beat me over the head with what these characters were feeling with dialogue. I think the dialogue here is very efficient and very economical. Sure. And I was into it. I think the actual violence and some of the visual atrocities are really fun, and they're really like harkening back to an era that it doesn't feel gratuitous, even though it kind of is.
Well, it is, but I think it's fine because it was building up to that, and like it was kind of playing it safe in the beginning. It's just like, okay, now we can have fun. Like we can have this moment separate itself from the beginning of it. So I don't mind that it gets gratuitous with the violence.
Okay, but yeah, it sounds like you definitely disagree though with the visual storytelling here.
I just think it's like fine. Like I compared this to something like Nobody, where like the movie's kind of trying to do something similar in terms of like establishing the mundane qualities of this like kind of ho hum guy. At least the beginning of Nobody, and like I feel like that movie, like it does a similar type thing and it establishes the same kind of stuff, but it does in a way that's visually interesting and stylistic. And I just feel like this movie, I just didn't get that same impression. Like I get what it's trying to do, and like I said, I appreciate that, but I just found it to be pretty drawn out, and it just didn't really find it to be, I guess, as interesting, because like you said, the characters themselves aren't super well developed beyond like the surface, so it just didn't really feel like I agree with you that the performances are good about making this a little bit more dynamic, and I think they have a lot of fun when they kind of are able to be emboldened in the second half. But I just feel like, I don't know, maybe a meatier script would have made this a little bit more satisfying.
I don't know if that might be where we disagree. I like that it didn't take itself too seriously with, you know, anything regarding realism. It just allowed itself to be campy and over the top. And
see, that's where I guess we disagree, because I want it to be campier. I want it to be like campier and weirder than it is.
I think if it had been any campier than it already was, the stakes wouldn't have felt right.
Stakes.
I think that we wouldn't have felt like anything bad could go wrong. It would have just been sort of like a farce the rest of the movie.
But it is basically a farce.
I don't think so, because I'm talking about the stakes in terms of like not just their lives, but the fragility of their relationship and their marriage.
Sure.
Like we do get to a point where that's what I'm more worried about, which is weird because I don't like the pastor guy for a long time in this movie. But then I gradually kind of warmed up to him a bit, but then I started to hate him again. But that's where I think the stakes were of like, could this relationship work? Is that why I'm liking these two characters? And I think that the ending is perfect because it doesn't, it's not neat or tidy at all with that part of the story.
Yeah, I have no disagreements about the ending. I just kind of wish it earned that ending a little bit more. Like, it just felt like, I don't know, it just felt like there's like some stuff here that's not quite as rich as it could be. I don't know if that just, like I said, if it just needs a stronger, tighter script, or if it needs to be a little bit more fleshed out, or maybe if like it had a little bit more consistency stylistically, it might have been able to pull that off. But for some reason, I just feel like it's like 2 decimals away from working, I think, for my opinion. Like it's not off, but it just feels like something isn't quite there to make it click all the way into place.
I think I agree with aspects of that. I definitely like this film more than you do. I think that I wanted it to be much better. Like I wanted it to be in like A-tour territory as I was watching this. I wanted it to feel like its Giallo, you know, sensibilities were more well-rounded, and this could feel like a runaway horror classic in the making. It's definitely not that. It's just one of those movies that you can just kind of watch and just kind of get like a short-term visceral enjoyment out of if you're a fan of the genre, right? Sure. And so that's where I come out of it. I don't look at it as something that's really lasting necessarily. I think it's going to be one of those movies that like, oh, hey, you know, like if you're looking at this kind of movie, this is a solid recommendation, that kind of thing. And my expectations too weren't super high, so I guess that could be painting some of my you know, positivity coming out of it. I don't know.
I just feel like my impression I get is that Stevens is like he definitely has something he wants to say here, but I don't feel he's like super confident as a filmmaker at this point to really establish like stakes and tones and to establish the dramatic tension, I guess, that should be building up in the opening moments. It just kind of felt like I said, like it felt like this stuff was just getting kind of drawn out, and it didn't really have a lot of pulp to it. And in some respects, that's fine, and I understand what it's trying to do, but I just feel like it's a lot of build up to a moment that I just kind of wish the second half of it dictated the movie more than the first. Kind of similar to In the Earth, I guess.
It is kind of funny because we were so sure that we were going to disagree more over Monday, you know, and I was not expecting us to be this far off on Jacob's Wife. I was kind of expecting to not be that into it.
I don't even think we're that far off. I mean, I don't know what your grade is, but I have a good idea of what it is. And I feel like we're only like 1 decimal off, I think. But...
Okay. Well, I from you, I was hearing like this is maybe going to be like a C+ kind of thing, maybe a C, and I'm a strong B. So, but you know, go ahead, say your piece.
I'm between, like I said, I mean, I'm between like a low B minus and a high C plus in classic Will Ashton mode. I think for me, it's a high C plus just because I just don't feel like it's quite confident enough to come together in a way that felt like it was worthy of this concept and the performance that we get from Barbara Crampton. And I also agree with you that Larry Feinstein or Festine, I forget. Fessenden, sorry. I do agree with you. I don't mean to undersell that performance. I do think he does a nice job as well. And I do think when they are able to have some, actual chemistry together, they do kind of have a nice little back and forth as well. But yeah, I just feel like it's not quite complete as it is. It just feels a little impartial as it is in its current execution. But I mean, like you said, I think for genre fans, they'll probably get something out of it. I mean, it's designed to be like Marriage Story if there's like some vampires in it, and that's kind of fun. And I do think it's a good concept. I just don't think it really comes together as well as I was ultimately hoping it would be.
I don't know if I can get on board with that Marriage Story comparison.
Well, that's what she said. That's what Barbara Crampton said.
I was thinking more of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf personally, but
right. I mean, I'm just telling you what she said. I mean, she's a producer and the actress of the film, so.
I don't know. I feel like that's just like marketing of like, here's a movie you've heard of.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That's fair.
My opinion. Yeah, I guess where I disagree is like, sure, not all aspects of this movie are confident. I think you're right that there are certain aspects of the filmmaking that definitely feel like Stevens was maybe a little uncertain about how he wanted to bring certain scenes about. But I do think in the most important ways, it absolutely has a clear goal and a clear like handling of the subject matter. And I think that all comes down to, I think Crampton and Fessenden are just brilliant together whenever they're on screen. I think this movie does fall short when they're separated, and particularly when there has to be interaction with other characters. There's another vampire character who comes into play that's just kind of like it's kind of half and half for me. And there's just some side characters I wasn't super invested in.
The cops,
and then the burnouts who are just kind of like laughably just like, I feel like they're trying to be teenagers, but in the movie they look like they're in their 30s. So it's kind of like the Monday thing, actually.
Yeah. Well, that just kind of felt like, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it just kind of felt like whoever they had casted couldn't do it. And then they were just like points to two people in their crew is like, hey, could you pull off playing teenagers? Like, I don't know. It's like, oh, we'll figure it out. No
one's going to care. This is a vampire movie. Like, it's fine. But no, I really dug it. So I'm a strong B. I think that it's for what it is. I think if you go into it looking for this kind of movie, you're going to get this kind of movie, and there's some nice surprises too. So I definitely recommend it.
I don't mean to come off too negative. I think, it's an indie film, and I respect the hustle, and I appreciate what they're trying to do. I just feel like maybe my expectations weren't quite met here, so that left me feeling like a better film was not made, unfortunately.
I would have thought that you would have bumped this like a full letter grade just for the scene where the rats devour an entire person.
Sure. I mean, that stuff's fun.
That was pure fun. I mean,
yeah, I mean, there's definitely stuff in here I like. Like I said, I mean, like, there are at least like 2 or 3 scenes in here that I think are like exactly what they should be.
Sure. All right. Well, it is, as I mentioned before, 98 minutes long. Pretty quick watch. And I believe you can watch this right now on Shudder. So give it a look if you're interested.
I think it's only on VOD right now, but it might be going to Shudder later. But I don't know for sure.
Possibly. Yeah, you might be right. All right. One last film for us this week. Let's talk about Arlo the Alligator Boy. This is a new hand-drawn animated musical film. This is the first film directed by Ryan Crago.
Are we going to do a film that doesn't revolve around 2 mismatched characters in a fraught relationship trying to figure out their differences in a heightened scenario?
I think the joke there is that this movie kind of does that anyway, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you caught it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, Not exactly a 1-to-1 with Thunder Force and some of the other Netflix films we talked about recently, but sure. You kind of mentioned to me that this is very much reminded you of the SpongeBob movie, the recent one,
the first
Sponge
one.
On the Run.
Yeah, and the new one, I guess.
I mean, they are very similar.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of that too is it's similar to the Sponge on the Run movie. That one really was more of like a launching pad for a new TV show, basically. So this movie is kind of like an unofficial pilot, right?
Yeah, this is definitely a pilot. I feel like the stuff that was a pilot for the new SpongeBob movie was kind of like thrown in haphazardly. Like I think they had a SpongeBob movie and they were also like, hey, can you like advertise this thing we're doing?
Yeah.
Like I guess.
Just like kind of threw stuff in there for the sake.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas this is more similar maybe to like Return of Jafar, which was like one of the earliest cases of this, where that was like a direct to VHS movie sequel to Aladdin that turned into it was like the first couple episodes of the Aladdin TV show on Disney. So it is kind of more similar to that whole thing because it is like a standalone movie. It functionally works on its own, but you know, at the end of it, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I could see how a series is going to come out of this. It's going to be called I Love Arlo. And this movie, first of all, I want to say that I'm glad hand-drawn movies are still being made. And I'm really glad that Netflix is one of the streaming services that is investing in that kind of thing. Klaus was one of my favorite movies of that year. I think it was 2019. Christmas movie, one of my favorite Christmas movies of all time. It's fantastic. And it's hand-drawn. And it's from the Sergio Pablos, the guy who did the Minion stuff. Sure. And I have to say, though, when I first saw like the poster for Arlo the Alligator Boy, I was not interested because I hate the character design. He just
actually,
looks
I don't mind that.
Unpleasant to me. Okay. You compared this to Teacher's Pet. Is that what I've been waiting to ask you this? Is it the Teacher's Pet thing because of the design?
I think so. I don't know. I mean, because like Teacher's Pet, that was a movie as well where it's like, it's not this movie feels like you said, like it feels like a movie for a show that doesn't exist or like a show that like I wouldn't know about and I'm like watching the movie of like the origin story of like characters I don't really know about. And that's kind of my experience with Teacher's Pet. Like it's like this big broad musical for like a show that I didn't really know much about as a kid. Like I was like kind of aware of it. And it's also like kind of a niche thing that they gave like a bunch of money to for a movie, which is kind of bizarre. But yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, like, it felt to me like you were saying, like, SpongeBob meets Teacher's Pet meets, like, regular show. It's like kind of like an amalgamation of those three things. And I'm not an expert on regular show, but I kind of had that kind of,
I've never
like,
seen it.
Modern kind of ironic tone to it that's kind of becoming prevalent in children's animation on, like, Cartoon Network nowadays. Sure.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of love for this movie. You know, I'm not seeing a ton of like, this is the best thing ever, but I'm seeing a lot of, I'm into it. It feels different. It's kind of nice that it's original and people really dig the music. We mentioned that this is a musical.
Oh, really?
And I'll say, I don't think the music in here is solid. Like there's a few songs in here that I was humming. I was, tapping my foot. There's some fun sight gags in this movie.
Oh,
The thing though, that this movie kind of loses me, and the reason I'm not super high on it, honestly, is the story. It's just so been there, done that how many times. All it is it's this little boy who's he's an alligator boy, and he gets his I Want song. He grew up in a swamp, but he finds out he's really from New York City. And yeah, it's like Shrek, but then it's also like Elf, where it's like, I got to go to New York City to meet my father. But then he goes on like a road trip. And he meets friends along the way, and it's about the family or the friends that you find. And
oh, really? Wow.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's just so many other movies. And I think it's such a shame because this movie has such a clear creativity with the types of characters, the jokes it's making, the kind of how edgy it kind of gets in some place, at least edgy for like a kid's TV show.
I guess, yeah.
Not super edgy, but like, it pushes some envelopes.
I guess it just kind of like, it's good about like once everything feels kind of like placid or like kind of like familiar, it'll just come out of nowhere with like a kind of pointed joke or like an absurd sight gag that's just like what the, and then just like, okay, well that kind of put a pep in my step, kind of like kept me off guard.
Yeah, it's a little bit more Cartoon Network than Nickelodeon in terms of just kind of the risks the types of risks it's willing to take. Like, for example, there's a character in here named Marcellus, and as soon as he came up, I was like, all right, here's Will Ashton's favorite character.
I don't know if he's my favorite character.
He was my favorite character.
Oh, I thought you liked the toad or the frog.
Well, that's the thing. So Jeromeo is the best character, but he's not in the movie enough. And first, the movie should have been about Jeromeo and Marcellus starting a carnival in Coney Island. That was, or like not Coney Island, but the seashore place.
Well, I mean, I think they knew that was his character's name, Geronimo?
Jeromeo. Oh my gosh.
Sorry, Jeromeo. They knew that he had too much star power. And they're like, we can't, like, we need to establish Arlo. Like, we can't have them together because he's just gonna steal the show. Like, let Arlo have his time in the sun.
They did the same thing that they did in Moana, where they took the pet sidekick from Moana, like, but then they gave, like in Moana, they gave her the chicken over Pua. Pua just disappears, and then we're stuck with the weird chicken for the whole movie. And here it's the same deal. We lose Jeromeo, and for what? The cat with the hoodie? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That felt like something that was like, I'm guessing that character is going to play a bigger role in the show.
Probably,
and I didn't really get her deal in this movie. It kind of felt like she was shoehorned in. But yeah, like the same time, I do kind of wish the supporting characters weren't kind of like haphazardly thrown into the movie. It just like they were just like, hey, like you're not going to get these characters now, but once you watch the show, you're going to love them.
Well, my favorite part of this movie is when part of this movie, I forget that Arlo is even like, this is his story. And we spend a lot of time with the side characters in the middle where they're kind of shining. They're kind of doing fun stuff. And Arlo's just kind of like along for the ride. And it was more jarring to me when eventually they're like, Arlo, you're this incredible person. We've been through so much. I was like, Arlo didn't do anything. Like, he hasn't really had a lot of heart to hearts with you guys. He has like this whole thing with Birdie, voiced by Mary Lambert. Arlo is voiced by Michael J. Woodard. And most of the movie's like heart is between them. But he doesn't really like, I don't know. I never really felt like the other characters were there for him.
Right. It does fall into formula, I think, a little bit too much to the point where it's like it's expecting you to have these emotional stake in these characters because we're at this point in the film, and it's like, well, I didn't really get to know you them well, so like, and I don't really feel like the characters are that developed at this point to really have that kind of emotional connection. That's what I was talking about before, where I felt like these characters like knew each other well, like in the show. And like we're seeing their origin story, and we have like that emotional background with them, like kind of similar to like SpongeBob and Patrick in the SpongeBob movie, where it's like if you were just to watch the SpongeBob movie without watching the show SpongeBob, like you wouldn't really like feel that much about the characters, but because you've seen them in all those episodes, you're like, okay, I care about their relationship. And it feels like, yeah, like without seeing the show for this, I don't really have a lot of emotional investment in these two characters being close friends.
Yeah. Well, not to bring it too much again to the SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, but it does that same kind of thing, right? Where like you get why SpongeBob and Patrick are close because they spend most of the movie together. But then when it comes time in that movie for Squidward and Sandy and Mr. Krabs to be like, we love SpongeBob, like their whole deal with that, in order for them to make sense of it out of somebody who might not have watched the show, which doesn't make sense because SpongeBob is so iconic. Like people know those characters and everything. But even that movie kind of takes it out to be like, it's because of this thing at summer camp. It's not because of the hundreds of episodes where they've had all these meaningful relationships we are aware of. You know what I mean? It's like if in like the Avengers, like if in Avengers Endgame, they had like reminisced on like all of these things that we didn't even know happened with like between Captain America and Tony Stark. Like they like reminisce that time they met at summer camp or something, and you're like, well wait, like we you could have just reminisced about other movies we've seen. I don't know, it's very odd. And again, I do think that like the Arlo and Birdie stuff makes sense from a story level because like they have moments together, they have conversations, you can sort of see why they would have like a connection, and Birdie makes sense to me as a character. But it's like you said, they throw in all the other side characters sort of just as like a precursor, like a palate or not palate cleanser, but like an appetizer, right, to a show that can have a bunch of different characters for Arlo to interact with. And it's in that respect, it's pretty cynical in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. In that respect, I agree with you. In other ways, I disagree, but we'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay. I do like this voice cast. We have Jennifer Coolidge as one of the villains, which is really, really fun. Jonathan Van Ness voices Felicia, this like furball, kind of pink furball creature. Yeah. He's fantastic like as a voice actor. And then, Tony Hale, who I didn't know was the voice of the teeny tiny Tony character.
Oh, you didn't know that?
I didn't know that until I saw the credits. I was like, who is that? Yeah.
I caught it pretty early on. Jonathan Van Ness was the one I was trying to point. I was like, he sounds familiar, but I don't quite get the voice.
Also, Annie Potts voices Arlo's mother, Edme, the adoptive mother, of course. So, yeah, it's a good voice cast too. I'm kind of curious, like if they're going to be able to like maintain that voice cast for the show. I assume they are, but you never know, right? I think things have changed with streaming. It used to be that like you have the big movie, the How to Train Your Dragon with like Gerard Butler and all that stuff. But then when the show gets made, they have to find like a few actors who are sound kind of close, but not
Right.
quite. Like I think Emperor's New Groove was kind of like that, right? Where like the Emperor's New School, they couldn't get David Spade to be the Cusco, so they had to get like some guy who sounds vaguely similar, you know. But they still had Patrick Warburton, obviously.
Well, of course. I mean, who else could play Kronk? Nobody.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I do like the voice cast. I particularly like, is it Michael J. Woodard that voices Arlo?
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with him, generally speaking.
I think this is his first role, at least as a voice actor, I think.
I think it's him singing too. And
yeah, it is.
Great vocal talent.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, and I think that's, like you said, I have to assume they went with like an unknown here for the fact that they could have that same voice actor in the show. And I think that's a wise choice. I think he brings a lot of heart and personality to the character, and I think he does a lot of heavy lifting that the screenplay doesn't. I think his performance feels pretty earnest and sincere. And
Sure.
yeah, I think that's part of the reason why I actually did end up enjoying this film, if not to a great extent.
I didn't enjoy it. I found it to be a bit of a slog. I didn't really care about what was going on, but I did have this feeling that I would have loved to watch this with like my nieces and nephews in a movie theater.
I was wondering if you were going to say that.
Oh, absolutely, because like, this is the kind of thing they would be into, you know. And look, we all know, everybody in this planet knows that I love me some good animated films, and it doesn't matter if they're if they're young at heart, you know, if they're for a younger audience more so than they are for me. I find the general conceit of this movie to be so dry and plain and boring that I feel like the only enjoyment I would get out of it is watching it with somebody who hasn't seen a lot of movies like that and just seeing them like, you know, fall in with the charm more than I would. That would be more of an enjoyable experience for me personally. But it's not like this movie doesn't have really great qualities. It certainly does.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I was watching it, I mean, I don't always know what you're going to think, but when I was watching, I was like, I feel like this is going to be one I'm going to like more than John, just because it had such a trope heavy plot. I'm just like, I know John, in animation wise, like when a plot is this tropey, he just doesn't tend to like it. Gets in the way of his enjoyment, and I figured that was going to be the case here, and that's unfortunate, but that's fine. I do agree with you that like, because it is so kind of paint by numbers in terms of the plotting, and just like, this is what we are supposed to do with our big movie for our show. Like, it's supposed to hit this beat and do this thing, and characters are supposed to go from X to Y to Z, and like, you know, and I do find that to be tiresome, and I agree with you that it is kind of cynical in terms of the execution of it, and it makes me think about the making of the movie and like what Netflix wants out of it, as opposed to just really enjoying the film and the characters and getting to like them and all that stuff. But I think there's enough here, just like you said, like, for one, the fact that it is a 2D animated musical film, like, we just don't get those that often anymore. It does feel like kind of a blast from the past in that way. But it is interesting to me that it is kind of implying, or it's applying these Disney-like sentimental beats with a kind of new age, like Cartoon Network ironic sense of humor. And I don't think it fully comes together, but there's enough of both here that I found myself endeared by it. Slug is not a word that I would use personally. I found myself pretty amused by it throughout, even when I wasn't, like, even when I was taking issues with the characters and the story beats. I guess the one thing I disagree with you is that I do like Jennifer Coolidge, and I thought Flea gave a pretty...
her. I said I like Jennifer Coolidge.
I mean, I like as an act. Well, what I was gonna say is that I like those two as voice actors, her and Flea. But I feel like those characters are like the most tired, like Southern stereotype kind of things. Like, I just found those characters.
Okay, yeah. I agree. No, we agree. I like their voice talents, and I think that, you know, I liked all the voices basically in this movie. Sure. But yeah, I agree with you about the characters themselves not really being that entertaining.
I just found, I mean, that was my biggest issue with the movies. That like they're just like the laziest villains.
Yeah.
Like they barely come into the plot. They have like no real like threat to the characters.
Team Rocket. You know,
right.
Like,
yeah.
But honestly, my biggest issue is totally different. My biggest issue, and I can't speak too much of this because it would be kind of spoiler territory, but I think what this movie ultimately says about forgiveness and abandonment is actually like really messed up. I think that this movie is just like, oh my gosh, it undoes or unwrites a lot of like really, I think, traumatizing stuff. And, you know, I don't care about it too much in the sense that like, I feel like kids are going to watch it and it's just going to wash over them. Like, they're not going to really pick anything up from it. But as an adult, I'm just like, man, no thanks.
I think that didn't bother me because I knew there was going to be a show, and I'm assuming there's going to be a little bit more like narrative groundwork established there. Like, they're just kind of like they're wrapping it up in terms of like here's like an ending for the movie, but I don't know. I mean, I don't really know what the show's going to be like. If it's going to be more like episodic and character driven, or if it's going to be narrative based. I don't really know for sure. I don't want to assume either, but I was willing to excuse that because I was like, well, if there's going to be a show, there's probably going to be more ground explored there.
It just bugs me because I think this movie, it does have its heart in the right place. And I kind of similar to you, I don't think it fully nails the tonal balance it's going for, or the two types of things that's trying to merge here, the Cartoon Network edgy sight gag humor with the like Disney pop aesthetic. But it's a good idea to try to merge those two things. I think there's absolutely a market for it, especially with this kind of animation that can push the envelope a little bit. I'm totally down with that sort of thing. It's just that's why the ending hits me so wrong, because like up until that point I was like, I'm with this message in the movie. I'm with what it's trying to say, and it's not that it's terrible about it, but I do think that it's so wishy-washy with something that is definitely not an easy issue, and they kind of treat it like it is. And there was something that rubbed me the wrong way about that. Again, I'm not like blasting the film over it. I'm not dropping it like a whole decimal or whatever over it. I'm kind of more indifferent.
Canceling Arlo.
I'm not canceling. You know what? Arlo doesn't need to be canceled. I want to hear more. I would listen to the soundtrack of this thing. That's how much I actually enjoyed the music mostly. There are some songs in here that I'm like, whatever, but
Yeah, I guess that's where we actually disagree more, is that like I found the soundtrack to this, like I didn't dislike the songs, like I enjoyed them in the moment, but as soon as they ended I just forgot about them entirely. Like I can't like hum a beat for any of these songs or anything like that. Like I remember like the like visual like choreography of them, but I don't remember the songs themselves. They've completely washed themselves out of my brain.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be clear, they're not the best songs. And I don't think I could hum. I think there's only one that I could. But like you, I did enjoy them in the moment. And I do generally like this kind of like poppy kind of music a little bit more. And I think they are trying to do something kind of like borrowing a beat from Hamilton a little bit, for better or worse, like the Lin-Manuel Miranda, like not rapping, but definitely like a spoken word mixed with pop. That it works for some songs a lot more than it does for others. I think the ones that it doesn't work are the slower songs, which I did not like at all. But I think the bop in this is more and more and more. That song and the reprise, like they actually, I think, put a ton of work into those to really make them feel alive. And so that's why I think for me, I can hum that song.
Are you talking about the main Arlo song that he like sings?
The main Arlo song. I don't know what you were humming there, but sure.
I don't know. I'm trying to remember how it goes. Like that's the thing, is that like I can like vaguely hear the beat in my head, but like I don't remember exactly how the song goes or like what the lyrics were. I'm
too self-conscious to do it, but I can do. Yeah, it's like more. It's definitely like a thing.
You've rapped in the show before.
Yeah, but I had preparation. I had a stunt team on hand.
Yeah, you prepared for a week. You had
auto-tune. Absolutely, yeah. But okay, I feel like I'm being a little bit harsh on this movie, or harsher than you are, but I land on a C+. I feel bad about it too, because it has things about, it's kind of like how you were with Jacob's wife, it's like there are things about it I want more of in these kinds of movies. Like it has like, I think that's what ruins it a little bit more for me. It's like, it doesn't need to be formulaic. It has the recipe for a really avant-garde and engaging, timeless animated film, but then it just stuffs it with all this boring tropey stuff we don't need. So C+ for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like over the moon with this movie. I just found it to be an amusing kind of diversion for whatever it was, like 90 minutes. Yeah, I mean, I think I am more sympathetic to the fact that like I didn't know it was going to be a musical for one, and I didn't really know it was going to be kind of more cinematic than I anticipated. I thought it was just going to be, like you were suggesting, more of like a direct pilot, or like a pilot that they stretched out into a film. And I found it by and large to be amusing. Like I said, like I don't think it really pushes any envelopes. I don't think it does anything that you haven't seen in countless other animated films or family films. But I do find the characters to be kind of endearing and sweet. I don't know if they're enjoyable enough for me to want to watch the show. It's just simply out of my age demographic. And if it's not a movie, I'm just not, like you said, unless like I had like younger siblings or something that were watching it, I don't really see how I'm going to get invested in it. And I do agree with you that I think the fact that it is trying to set up a show does give it a cynical kind of or like I guess like a bitterness that is a little annoying. It makes it hard to appreciate the movie on its own terms. But by and large, I think it's sweet. I think it is enjoyable. I do find myself impressed by the animation and the voice performances, and I didn't mind the character designs. I'm not quite sure why you were against them. I thought they were kind of inspiring.
Just Arlo. I like all of the character designs except for him.
Okay, I thought they were all pretty inspired and silly, and they weren't like visually grating or anything like that, which tends to be the case more and more with CG animation. But I found this to be a forgettable and not necessarily outstanding animated film, but one that I enjoyed for the short amount of time that I watched it.
I'll say Teeny Tiny Tony or whatever his name is. I didn't like his character design as much. I was like, whatever. He's probably one of my least favorite characters. But
yeah, I mean,
with Arlo, the thing is, I don't need Arlo to be this like milquetoast vanilla kind of looking character. I'm glad that they swung. They swung for the fences with that character design, and I appreciate it. I respect it. It's admirable that they were trying to make him just feel like very unique and different, but I just don't. I respect his swing. I just don't think it quite works for me. I don't know. He's very off-putting to me. It's kind of like Teacher's Pet. I think that character design is really weak in my opinion, but that we don't have to relitigate a 20-year-old show or whatever.
Yeah, that I think almost everyone has forgotten besides maybe us.
Sure. And Corey Woodruff.
Yeah, Corey Woodruff, who is apparently a big fan.
Yeah. He brought it up with you.
To my
So
surprise.
clearly you're of a mind on that. I will say there are two other things I want to mention before we wrap this up. You kind of mentioned it, but yes, it does look very cinematic, and I think the animation here is really good. We didn't speak enough about that probably. The colors and the motion and the composition of a lot of different shots. It's an exciting movie. It makes it feel less of a slog than it otherwise would have for me. And I know you didn't find it. You found it to be pretty amusing, and it's probably because I think it's just like a gorgeous movie, and that's kind of why I wish that I had seen it blown up a little bit more. Would have been really cool to see this on a huge screen where it just feels, this world really feels more immersive than it did on a smaller screen. That said, it's not the greatest animation in the world. I still think Klaus is definitely like the definition of like, you've never seen anything quite like this before. You've seen a movie like Arlo though, in terms of the animation. I just think they did a really great job but they didn't really do anything all that original or innovative with the animation to be super fair.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because my expectations were lower and I just didn't really have much in terms of like expectations for what the animation was going to be or like what the characters' designs were going to be. I guess I was more impressed by that, but I do agree. Like if we're talking like, top tier 2D animation, I don't think this one compares in that regard.
The last thing I'll mention is, we mentioned the music quite a bit. I do want to mention it's by Alex Garringas, who did the music with the director, Ryan Crago. And he's done a lot of music that I'm a fan of. He did music for Voltron, and it's funny, he did music for Sponge on the Run. We mentioned that movie so many times, forgot to mention that he was I think one of the composers for the SpongeBob movie. Okay. If not the main person. I think he worked on it, but he wasn't the main composer, because I know Hans Zimmer worked on it. But he's worked with Hans Zimmer a bunch on several things. But good music. I'm glad he found time to do this one, because I know he's a very, very busy composer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the score. It just the soundtrack, I guess, was where I found it to be kind of forgettable.
Well, he worked on the songs too, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I don't.
Oh, both. Okay.
I wasn't. I was more taken, I guess, by the score than the soundtrack.
All right. And, one last thing I'll mention. So this was Netflix animation, but they also did this through a production company called, and I'm sorry, I have to say it, Titmouse Incorporated.
Okay.
Which I mentioned to you while I was watching the movie. I was like, there's like a thing called Titmouse in this movie where it's like an Easter egg, and because I had never heard of it before, but It's a real production company. They did they worked on Breadwinners, and I looked this up. I think Big Mouth. They've done some Adult Swim stuff. I'm just kind of surprised that they would show that in this movie, considering. But yeah, whatever.
I mean, I don't know. I'm no parent. I don't know if that's unacceptable, but it didn't bother me.
I would not want a kid saying that word, in a public setting. Probably be kind of awkward and uncomfortable for some people. But what are you gonna do? That is Arlo the Alligator, C+ for me. And you said you were B on it, right?
I'm a B-. Oh, I was also gonna say they Titmouse also worked on Shirkers, which I know you liked a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, fantastic. All right. That's it for this week on Cinemaholics. Thank you so much for listening. As always, we'll be back later in the week, of course, with some bonus content. Hope you all can check that out on the feed when it comes out. And for the main show, we aren't going to be doing an Oscars thing for the main show. That's just going to be for a bonus. I believe next week we're talking about Mortal Kombat, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, if there's anything else you want us to check out, as always, hit us up, email us, whatever you need to do. Hit us up on Twitter. All our social links are in the comment or in the show notes, as usual. And yeah, we'll see you all next week from the Internet California. I'm John Negroni.
And for Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
See you next time.